We are talking about making disciples today. What does it mean to be a disciple? And that word is not one that's super familiar in our culture today. We don't just go around calling ourselves disciples very much, except within the church world. So I want to kind of break this down. What does this mean to be a disciple today? Pop quiz. What is the mission statement of the United Methodist Church? This is the United Methodist Church, right? What is the mission statement of the United Methodist Church? Anybody know? To make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That's the United Methodist mission statement. I am of the opinion it's a great mission statement because God has called us to do that. In Matthew 28, we see Jesus talking to his disciples before he was getting ready to leave this world. And he had when somebody's getting ready to go on to the next place, they often say some very important things right before they leave. And this was his message to his disciples in Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." That's a lot of authority. "Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." Jesus' call to his disciples was, go and make more disciples. Go into all the world and make disciples. This word disciple is kind of like the word student. Go and make more students. Go and teach people about me and teach them to follow me. But it's bigger than the word student. It's not just that. And to get kind of a feel for what this word disciple meant in Jesus' time, I want to talk about a few of the cultural things that were happening at the time. Now, in Jesus' day, everything in the Jewish culture was surrounded the worship of Yahweh, God. Everything in their culture was directed towards the worship of him. And so rabbis, teachers, were some of the most important, revered, respected people in all of the land. These people called rabbis. And people looked up to them, and that's what most little kids, when they were growing up, if you asked them what they wanted to become when they got older back then, they would say, "I want to be a rabbi," because everybody looked up to them and thought, "Oh, he's a rabbi. He must be something special. Wow, he's come, and I want to hear what he has to say." These people were very revered and looked up to. So, in Jesus' day, this was something that people sought after, and they went to school for this purpose. People started going to school, girls and boys, at the age of 5. They would go to what was called Bet Sefer. Bet Sefer meant house of the book. And they would learn the first 5 books of the Bible that we have today. They would memorize. That was their job. And from age 5 to 11, their job was to memorize the books of the Bible. The first 5 books, the Torah is what they called it. And they were supposed to memorize it word for word. Because back in those days, they didn't have the printing press. They didn't have their own individual Bible. They had scrolls. Everything was written on scrolls. And so if you wanted to know the Word of God and be able to access it, you had to memorize it because you didn't always have it available to you in your house like we do today. You memorized it and you knew it. And so from age 5 to 11, they would memorize the Torah, which had all sorts of instructions for living and doing things within their community. This was important. They would memorize it. That was their job, girls and boys. And then when they got to about the age of 11, they would graduate this school of the Torah. They would graduate that school. Girls would usually go and start doing housework. They were probably already doing it, but they would go, and it was a little different time back then, so girls would be in charge of the housework and taking care of their house and start having a family at that point. And boys, if they were really great, and if they had done their job and memorized the Torah, if they were the quality, the top of their class in learning, they would be invited to the next level. If not, they would say, the teachers would be like, well, you need to go and work the trade of your father or whoever you have. Be a fisherman, be a carpenter, do the things that your dad's doing, go and do that. But if they were the best of the class, if they were the cream of the crop, they would be invited to the next level of learning. It's called Bet Talmud, which is called House of Learning. And they would begin this process of learning, and they would go through a process of being asked questions and grilled by their rabbis. And then they would respond, not with an answer, but they would respond with a question to their question. And they were taught to ask questions and discuss, and this idea of learning the law, and then they would memorize not just the first 5 books, but they would memorize Genesis through Malachi. They would memorize the Old Testament. Crazy, right? These people would learn that. You see Jesus actually starting this process. They would start the process. They would go to their first ever Passover in Jerusalem, and they would start meeting these rabbis and talking with them. And Jesus, you see him, his family takes him to the temple. There's a story where his family takes him to the temple, he meets with these rabbis, and he's talking back and forth, and the rabbis are like, who is this kid? Who is this? He's really like, he's got it. Because they're amazed at the questions that he's responding with to them. And they see Jesus and they're like, this kid could be what we're looking for. Like, he could be a rabbi, we think. And then his parents, like, don't know where he's at, and they find him, and they're like, what were you doing? He's like, well, I'm in the house of the Lord. Where do you think I would be? But it's a very interesting story, but it shows this culture of bringing their children to the temple and having them meet with the rabbis and being grilled and tested in their knowledge. So they would go through this second phase, and if they were the cream of the crop, they would be invited to the next phase. If not, then they would say, okay, now go back and be a carpenter, go back, be a fisherman, go back to your family. You have this knowledge, now use it in your everyday life with your trade. But if they were the cream of the crop, the best of the best, they would be invited to the next stage, which was called the Bet Midrash, the house of study. And at this phase, they would choose a rabbi that they respected, that they thought was, this is who I want to model my life after. This is who I want to be like. I want to do the things that they do. They would choose a rabbi and say, can I be your disciple? Can I be your disciple? And the rabbi would test them and grill them and ask them questions about what they believed and their interpretation of Scripture. And if they answered the right way and the rabbi thought, this kid, I think, could do what I do. I think that they could live like I live. I think they could live out the teachings of Scripture like I do. The rabbi would say, come follow me. Come follow me. If not, he would say, go back, work the trade of your family. But if he was the cream of the crop, he would say, come follow me. Come and follow me. Do what I do. And a phrase that was often very revered and respected, and they would use as they were entering into this process, they would say to their students, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. May you be covered in the dust of your rabbi, meaning may you follow him so closely that whatever your rabbi is kicking up, the kind of dust that he's walking in, may you be covered in that. May you follow him so closely that you live like he lives, and you're covered in the dust of your rabbi. So this was like a mentoring process. And how appropriate that the Boy Scouts are with us today, doing a similar kind of mentoring process. They're making disciples, hopefully of Jesus, but also they're making disciples of Boy Scouts. You know, they went through the process, and now they're making disciples and saying, here's how you're supposed to live your life. Be, kind and courteous, thrifty, clean, reverent. What are the other ones? Come on. They're still in the process, right? They're still in the process. So, they are being discipled, just like these students were being discipled, and Jesus was schooled in this way of thought. And a lot of people think Jesus went through the process and he became a rabbi, a teacher. And at the age of 30, that's usually when the rabbi who had taught their students, they would release them and say, okay, you are now your own rabbi. You go and make disciples of your own and ask them to be a part of what you're doing. So, Jesus comes and he's 30 years old, right? He's about 30 years old, and he goes out and he's looking for students, disciples of his own. And I want to turn with you to Matthew chapter 4, where Jesus invites some people to come along with him. Matthew 4, verse 18. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, listen what he says, "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will make you fishers of men." At once they left their nets and followed him. Now I always found it odd before I had kind of read through this that Jesus is just, these guys are like fishing, and all of a sudden Jesus is like, "Come follow me," and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to follow this random guy," right? But Jesus says he was a rabbi. He was known in the land that he was in, and he was walking around, and he points to these fishermen who, if they were fishermen, what had happened to them? They weren't the best of the best, right? They hadn't gone through all of the schooling. At some point in time along their way, they failed at rabbi school, right? And they had been told, okay, now go and be fishermen with your fathers, do that trade. And so Jesus goes not to the best of the best. He goes to the JV team, the JV squad, and he says, "Come and follow me. I want you to be my disciples." This was an offer that they couldn't refuse, because this famous rabbi that was becoming known throughout the land said, "Come follow me. I want to teach you to be fishers of men." And so they left their nets and they followed after Jesus, and they began to be covered in the dust of their rabbi. An interesting story found as these disciples are following their teacher is found in Matthew chapter 14. If you want to turn there with me. Jesus has been walking with his disciples. They're learning from him. They're living with him. They're eating meals with him. They're doing all the things that their rabbi is doing. And at one point in time, the disciples go out on a boat. Jesus says, "I want you to go out on a boat. I'll meet up with you later." So all the disciples go out in a boat. And it says this, "During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. 'It's a ghost,' they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, 'Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid.' 'Lord, if it's you,' Peter replied, 'tell me to come to you on the water.' 'Come,' he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. What's Peter doing here? Is he crazy? Jesus is walking on the water. Peter's in a boat. And Peter calls out to Jesus, "Hey, if that's you, Jesus, tell me to come to you, and I'll walk on the water with you." Who does that? Right? You see somebody walking on water and automatically you're like, "Hey, tell me to come to you and I'll walk on water too." This is the words of a disciple, right? He sees his rabbi, who he's been following and learning from, who he wants to be like, who he's supposed to be like. He sees him walking on water, and Peter says to him, "If that's you, Jesus, tell me to come walk to you, and I will," because he knows he's supposed to do what his rabbi does. Then Peter got down out of the boat in verse 29. He walked on the water and came toward Jesus. What? Peter's walking on water. Crazy. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me!" Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" Now, I've read this passage before and thought, oh, Peter was doubting Jesus, like he didn't believe that Jesus was strong enough. But as I have read through it again and heard other people teach on this, was Peter doubting Jesus at this point? Who was he doubting? Himself, right? He wasn't sure he could do it. But Jesus says, "I believe in you. You of little faith in yourself. Come on, get up. You can do this. You can do what I do. You can be like me. I'm your rabbi. Come on, learn from me. Walk with me here. Let me show you how it's done." Oftentimes, as disciples of Jesus, it can be discouraging. We can feel like, man, I'm trying to believe in God. I'm trying to do all these things, but it can be difficult. And sometimes we forget. We know that we have faith and we believe in God and what He can do, but sometimes I wonder if we know that God believes in us, that God has faith in us. We have faith in Jesus and what He can do, but do we know that Jesus has faith in us and what we can do, what He can do through us? Jesus wants us to be His disciples, to follow after Him. He is our rabbi, and He has faith that we can do what He did. And even, He says, in one point in the Gospels, He says, "You will do the works that I did, and even greater things than I have done." Now, that's up to you to decide what that means. But Jesus believes in us. If we will follow after Him, if we will be His disciples, He will teach us, and we can be like Him and do the things that He did. The mission statement of the United Methodist Church is making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And if we truly become disciples of Jesus, we will transform the world. You don't walk on water and that not affect things around you, right? You don't walk with Jesus and not have it affect the things around you. And I'm teaching about discipleship the next 3 weeks because I believe that is our calling as this church, is to make disciples. To call people not only just to follow Jesus, but to call people and say, "Follow me as I follow Jesus." Paul said that in one of his letters to a church. He said, "Follow me as I follow Jesus." We can be rabbis in people's lives, living with them and allowing them to see how we live and asking them to follow us. And we're not just talking about gaining knowledge here. We're talking about lifestyle with each other. Like, in order to disciple someone, it's not just like you teach them a lesson or you say things at them. I'm really good at that. But making a disciple means that you make a commitment to people in your life and you say, "I'm going to live with you. We're going to eat together. We're going to sleep together." Not that close, but we're going to sleep together. We're going to live our lives together as a community where we see each other doing things, and you can learn from me, I learn from you, and we're going to walk together. That doesn't just happen you can't do that just 1 hour on a Sunday. In order to disciple people, you have to create space within your week. You have to create space within your day to live with other people. so that you can be a part of each other's lives and experience and get some dust on you from the other person. So, as a church family, we have been exploring the possibility of kind of expanding our Sunday morning time. And one of the reasons is we want to be able to spend more time with each other. We want to be able to invest in each other's lives, be able to spend more time with each other. And so we've been exploring moving our first service to a different time and our later service to a different time so that we can have some space in between to create some time where we can eat together, where we can study the Bible together, where we can live our lives with each other. We believe in discipleship. We believe that it's valuable to mentor other people and be mentored ourselves. And so we're going to take steps as a church family to create those spaces, not just on a Sunday morning, but really invest in each other and call each other to discipleship with Jesus Christ. Follow me as I follow Christ. We're taking it seriously because we believe the call of Jesus is serious. Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Follow me, and you can do the things that I have done and even greater things than I've done. Jesus can transform this world if we will follow him and be like him and do the things that he does. He believes in us. We are to be a people who encourage each other. That word encourage, you can break it down to encourage, right? We often say it as one word, but if you break it down, it's to encourage, to infuse somebody with courage. When you come to church on a Sunday morning, that's part of our role, is to encourage each other, to infuse the people around us with courage to live this life like they're supposed to live it, to infuse each other with the Spirit of God, to infuse each other with what we've been taught, infusing it to other people. What's within me, I want that to be within you. And so I want to ask you the question, as I conclude my message this morning: who are you infusing with courage? Who are you discipling in your life? Are you making disciples? And who is discipling you? Jesus, one of his main calls on all of our lives was in Matthew 28. Go into all the world and make disciples until you're 80 years old, and then you can stop. You're done at that point. Like, you can retire from making disciples. Wait, I think I read that wrong. Go into all the world and make disciples. He doesn't put an age limit on it. He doesn't put any specifics on it. He says, go into all the world and make disciples. Who are you making a disciple today? Can you point to someone in your life and say, that person is becoming like me as I follow Christ? This is what we're called to do. Not just come to a worship service, but to find those people around us that desire to follow Christ and say, hey, I know the way. Follow me as I follow Christ. And then also to look for those people who could be a rabbi to you, who you look up to and you think, I want to be, they follow Christ. Look at that person. I want to be like them in my life, and I want to spend some time with them getting to know how they follow Christ. We should all have someone who we're discipling and who is discipling us. And if you don't have that, ask for help figuring it out, because sometimes we need help figuring out who that person should be. This discipleship process can be one of the most beautiful things and life-transforming things in our life if we allow it to be. And I'm so thankful to have you all in my life. I'm learning from you, and I hope that you're learning from me as we walk together and follow Christ together. I pray that we continue to be discipled together. Let's sing together. Okay. Number 571 in your hymnals. Okay. number 571. Lynn has picked out a different hymn. I'm throwing a curveball here. So we're going to do number 571 together. Let's stand and sing together. Make of all disciples brothers of the Lord, that comes from thee, our Father, and thy eternal word. Inspire our ways of learning through earnest, fervent prayer, and let our daily living reveal everywhere. Oh, make of all disciples, baptizing in the name of Father, Son, and Spirit, from age to age the same. We call each new disciple to follow thee, O Lord, redeeming soul and body by water and the word. Go, make of all disciples, we at thy feet would stay, until each life's vocation accents thy holy way. We cultivate the nature God plants in every heart, revealing in our witness the master teacher's art. Go, make of